Hello, everybody. Welcome to Skeptic U. I am Brentley, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of a talk here about the one thing that I understand. Which of course, leave it to the punker to have a Skeptic U course on addiction. But of course, I mean, hey, we well, they say talk about what you know. Well, I definitely know about this through personal experience and interaction with people with degrees in psychology and things like that I've interacted with in order to get the treatment that I needed. I have had a lot of different addictions. Now, each addiction is different, but I'm trying to kind of like put them all sort of in the same bag of an overarching approach to them, right? And so as far as my story goes, I was very sheltered. I was homeschooled, and just kept away from reality. And what that it tends to do is that it makes it more difficult to cope once you get out to reality. So go figure. Yeah, I went and ended up using a lot of substances, and several of them I had trouble stopping, but I did end up stopping. So this is kind of just an overview of just what is addiction, how it works, certain conditions that can lead people to addiction more frequently, all religious based, and and then advice on how to get out of it. Right. So advice for if you are struggling with an addiction of some kind or someone that I have advice, and I have kind of like a method that is almost surefire way to get rid of it. So yeah, so that's what we're working on here today. So I do a show called The Punk Apostate, as you can see here, where I dive down the rabbit hole into the fundamentalist, extremist, algorithmic YouTube rabbit hole and just see what's going on down there. And usually try to have fun and make fun of stuff as we go because it gets pretty silly pretty quick. But here I'm going to be doing something completely different, and I apologize if I am a scatterbrain, like I just am. Like I said before, remember I've been addicted to a bunch so my brain's just all over. Anyway, it's always moving at a million miles an hour. So, but let's start out with what is addiction. Addiction is a treatable. I'm really glad that they added this because there's definitions within things like AA where they don't say they say that it's not treatable, that it's exactly not treatable. Addiction is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experiences. People with addiction use substances to or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. That tends to be what makes the addiction an addiction. We all have things that we do on a daily basis, and we all have substances that we consume on a daily basis, whether it be coffee or certain foods, sugar, whatever. But at some point, addictive behavior is when you can't stop doing a particular substance or behavior. Really, I'm sticking with the substance. I'm not going to get into like the negative behavior loops or whatever, like negative behavior pattern loops. I'm not really going to get into that because that's not exactly what I'm talking about here. It's similar, not the same, right? But what ends up happening is like the need, the perceived need for the substance begins to outweigh any kind of consequences that come from that substance, right? So, if somebody is spending money at the bar that they should be spending on rent or their children or whatever it is, that's the type of thing we're talking about here. Now, that coping mechanism, what they're doing to cope, is now running into their, and they're running into themselves and making their life a lot more difficult because of the thing that is supposed to help them feel better about their life. And actually, it's ends up causing more problems than it helps. Right. That's kind of what I'm working with as far as like what we're talking about here. Okay. Um, Now, like I said, all addictions are different. But I'm gonna stick because the opiates, I think, are in like a separate category. Now, some of this does help with opiates still because it kind of helps you get out of your head with it. But there is a huge physical aspect to opiates that I think are unlike most addictive substances. But it's not the same as like alcohol and nicotine and things like that. Nicotine's a great one, just as like sort of an overarching like this is like this is sort of just how all addictions kind of function. It's like almost the best one because most people that do nicotine, they know they're addicted. You know what I mean? It's not even like they're getting a high out of it. I don't think there's anybody that would say that they get, oh man, I got so nicotined up. It was awesome. Wow, that was some good nicotine, bro. Like, you're not going to get that. You get, well, I got my fix, which is kind of just on the nose as far as like what is happening here, because they can clearly tell that they have created a need that they then now have to fulfill. So, how this works, let's start with how addiction works. So let me do this definition really quick because I feel like this is a really good one for this talk specifically, like what we're going to tackle here. Addiction occurs when a user takes a substance by choice for entertainment or as a coping mechanism and takes it so often that they develop the deeply held belief that they can't manage life without it. That's very important here. That is what that it's when it comes to like street epistemology and things like that, where they say like go after the faith. Don't get caught up in the details of the theology and stuff like that. Go after the faith. Go after their epistemology. Go after how they know what they think they know. Right? Which works the same way here. Okay, we're going to go after the deeply held belief that you need a substance. Right? That is how skepticism can really smash this whole behavior loop apart, right? Because it's all about your belief. It's all about your perception. Yes, there's a chemical element, and we'll get into that. But the main thing is that it's all about belief. Now, I myself was stuck on opiates for some time. Now, that one I think is one of the most difficult to get out of. And if you or someone you love or know that is struggling with that needs help, they really need to seek out some kind of medical intervention. This what I'm going to give you here is it goes good with that in tandem, but you need that chemical intervention because it's extremely painful. It's extremely painful to come off of opiates, just full stop. It just is. Because it literally kills pain, right? And then if you get used to that pain being killed, what happens? Well, you're going to feel a bunch of pain. That's how that goes when you don't have it. So, I actually got in a car accident when I was 17 and hurt my back, and was briefly prescribed opiates. But then I, of course, wanted, it still was hurting and it still hurts to this day. But I go back, I was going back to pain management. I'm down here in Florida, got caught up in the whole, epidemic, the whole opioid epidemic, and, stopped. Once they shut all the doctors down, then it was like, okay, now what? And that was like when I really lost a lot of friends and stuff because they were getting it semi safely from these clinics and things, these pain clinics, and then all of a sudden it became just on the streets, just street stuff, which means a lot of ODs. And so, yeah, it's really unfortunate, and that's why I think this is really important that we address this because a lot of people do struggle with it, and it feels impossible from within it. But, after that, I ended up going to a methadone clinic. From the methadone clinic, I switched to Suboxone. From Suboxone, I was able to stop. It was a very long, trek, and I had to deconvert in order to do it. So, religion conditions you in a lot of ways that are not helpful for things like addiction, right? So when you're a kid and you're in the church and everything, they're indoctrinating you. They want you to rely on the religion. That's very important to them, right? That you rely on this religion. So in order to get you to rely on the religion, they need you to not be able to rely on yourself or not believe that you can rely on yourself. So what do? They condition you. They tell you, "Hey, you can't do it on your own. You can't, life is too hard. You can't make it out there on your own. It's too hard." You know, you need something. What do you need? Well, you need Jesus, right? And that's what they say. You need Jesus, and that'll fix everything. But they condition your brain to like need Jesus. Now when the Jesus thing doesn't pan out, because let's face it, it's not going to, because it's literally nothing. It is not. There's nothing there. It doesn't actually do anything. So when that doesn't pan out, you turn to another coping mechanism. Not because you actually need one, but does it really matter if you do need one or not? If you believe that you do, you're going to do it either way. The power of belief, it's insane how strong the power of belief is. This is like the entire pseudoscience industry, the woo medications and everything. They don't have to actually help you, right? They just have to convince you that you're being helped by whatever the product is, even if it's just sugar pills, does literally nothing, you know? But if the individual believes that it is helping, then it doesn't matter if it's helping or not, because their belief is all that matters in this relationship. So the person has sold you the pills, now they're done. It's the snake oil, it's the snake oil mentality. You just got to get them to believe that it's working. Now you can condition the brain. You can convince people that they are feeling pleasure. You can't convince them that they're feeling pain when they're not, but you can convince them that they're feeling pleasure when they're not, which is interesting, right? It's the same kind of understanding that when you're at a bar, or not a bar, let's say like a party. Like you're at a party, you're at a house party back in the day, you're in your 20s, right? And one of your buddies had a kegger, so you go to the kegger and there's somebody there that is, having fun and everything. And, they're like, "Oh man, I'm so drunk." And then you like point out that they've been drinking O'Doul's all night, which has no alcohol in it, right? But they're like, "No, no, I'm drunk. I feel good." I'm like, they have convinced themselves, due to being around all of the other people that are behaving a certain way, right? So there's like that group mentality, right? But then there's also just the expectation part of it. I'm drinking alcohol, I should be getting drunk. This is what should be happening, right? And so you just kind of behave like that is the what is happening, right? And because you believe that it's happening, it doesn't really matter if it is or not. See what I'm saying? So those, the people are, "Oh, I'm sorry, yeah." You're like, "Dude, you've been drinking all O'Doul's, man." They're like, "Oh shit, wait a second. I know I was drunk a second ago. Hold on, what is happening?" That you get that. So it just shows how powerful belief can be in these kinds of situations. There's a couple other ways too that religious indoctrination hurts when it comes to this sort of thing. It also minimizes your experience here in this life on earth, because this ain't the real life. This one's just a vapor, remember? It's just a vapor. It doesn't matter, you know? Well, if this life doesn't matter, then it's going to be a lot easier to get over that hurdle mentally that, hey, that I can do something unhealthy to feel good, right? That hurdle is a lot easier to get over when you don't think that this life is all there is. You've extended your existence to eternity, which makes this just nothing. It is nothing, right? Doesn't even matter, right? And that is just very unhelpful for addiction, type of like for addictive type mentality, or for seeking coping mechanisms and things like that. Because if you view in your head that the coping mechanism outweighs the importance of staying healthy, then you're just going to go do that, right? You're just going to go do the coping mechanism. Be like, whatever, I'm going to live for eternity anyway. I'm going to go to heaven, so it doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. So it minimizes the experience that you actually have here on earth, which is not good. The other thing is that it tells you, it's constantly the self-talk. A lot of this stuff has to do with self-talk. The self-talk is harmful. Like if you're just constantly saying, I'm broken, I'm no good. The only reason that I'm a good person is because of my religion, because I'm a good Christian. That's the only reason I'm worth anything. That's damaging. That's not helpful. That's not good for you to repeat to yourself. Likewise makes it a lot easier for you to get over that hurdle that is being okay with hurting yourself in order to satisfy some kind of coping mechanism, right? Now, I want to talk a little bit about how addiction works, right? It's a deception. It's self-deception, which we as skeptics know. As humans, we're like really good at deceiving ourselves. You know what I mean? So what ends up happening, so you take this substance, right? And you believe that it's helping, right? Because the way it feels. What ends up happening when you use a substance, like we'll take nicotine for example, because I think that's probably the best one to explain this situation. Nicotine doesn't feel good at first. In fact, there's no, like I was saying, there's no real high associated with it, right? It's just sort of, people usually cough. They tend to feel really lightheaded. That seems to be the like high out of it, right? It's just feeling lightheaded. Like you can get the exact same feeling by like spinning around in circles, and making yourself dizzy and then stopping. It's not pleasant, it's really not. And anybody that's taken that first drag of a cigarette can tell you that's not pleasant. It doesn't feel good. But what ends up happening is you don't realize that you've now brought your state, your natural state, you've dropped it down, right? So now it's uneven. Now you're feeling less, you're not feeling as good as you would had you not done it at all, which is the opposite of what you think in your head. But this is why. Because when you drop that down, then the next time that you do it, it brings you back up, but not even as high as you were before. And then it drops you down even further, right? So this gap keeps getting bigger and bigger, feeling like it is a high, but it's not. It's just the juxtaposition from making yourself feel uncomfortable, to not as uncomfortable, not fully comfortable, because that would be, you'd be fully comfortable if you didn't ever touch the stuff. You would never have this juxtaposition. It gets lower and lower. It gets, you keep doing that juxtaposition more and more often, and then it feels to you like a high. It's similar to, and it's like, because it's satisfying a deficit that you caused, right? It's like you have created this mental deficit of like altering your brain chemicals to make yourself feel uncomfortable, so that when you do the chemical again, it makes it appear that it has gotten you high, but really it just got you back up to just sort of feeling normal. I hope all that this is how addiction works, right? This is like the mind games that go into it, right? It's all a deception. It's almost like somebody giving you $5 and you'd be like, wow, man, that's great. Thank you for the $5. That I am so glad. I'm grateful, that you gave me $5 without realizing that they stole 100. They stole 100 from you and they're just giving you back the 5. That's not actually better, right? Like you didn't actually gain anything. In fact, you lost $90, $95, you know? So, but to you, because you're not realizing that they are taking the money from you, you are saying, oh, okay, then that is still a plus in my head. It's a perfect overall example of how addiction functions, right? And then because that need for that to fix that deficit that you caused in the first place happens so often, you just end up relying on it, and then it stops even being something that is a coping mechanism and is something that you do completely unconsciously. You don't even notice that you're doing it. That was like one of the big ones. Is that, when you with a lot of the methods that I use and that I use to get off this stuff, it was all about getting your head out of the game first. Don't try to stop doing the behavior and then waiting for your brain to catch up. That's backwards. You're gonna you're gonna have what you would describe as withdrawals if you do it that way. But if you get your head out of it first, if you really evaluate what you're doing when you're doing it, like, does this make me feel good? Am I even noticing that I'm doing this right now? Like, is this a genuine pleasure right now? Is that what this happening? And the answer is always no. No, you do it mindlessly. You're not even thinking about it. You only thought about it because you wanted it. And then once you got it, you just nothing happened. You didn't care. It doesn't matter anymore. Right. Because it's just this lie that you're telling yourself, right? That it helps when it actually doesn't. And it's interesting to me how religion functions so similarly, right? The thing with nicotine it gives you a deficit, like I said. You do a brain chemical deficit, right? That makes you uncomfortable. And really, what the chemical does is make you feel uncomfortable. But then when you do it, it makes you feel less uncomfortable. So it makes you take that as I feel good now. Religion does the same thing. And what it does is Christianity, anyway, and I'd argue to say that most religions function this way. It's very similar to nicotine addiction. I think it was Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, and I disagree. Opiates hurt physically when you stop, like actually really, really hurt. Nicotine doesn't really. It makes you it makes you like have mental anguish, but it doesn't really hurt the same way that opiates do. So I was like, why would he use that? He should have used nicotine of the masses because that's the way it functions. Because here's what happens. You go to church and what do? They make you feel bad about yourself. Let's take Ray Comfort. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Ray Comfort. He has a very specific shtick. Okay, he does this man on the street thing. He runs around. He has a microphone. He finds people on the street and then asks them if they've ever lied, if they've ever stolen anything, if they've ever looked with lust at anybody. Basically, then when they admit that, he tries to get them to internalize it by calling them that. Okay, you just admitted to me that you are a lying, thieving, lustful, whatever, degenerate or whatever, he gets them to internalize that, right? Oh man, I'm bad. I'm bad. I'm bad. Like that's how he starts it. So, and then from there, now he's going to offer you the solution, right? It's just a complete obvious manipulation. If you get out from within this kind of like thinking, it is so stark and obvious the way that they manipulate. It's to get you to internalize the self-hatred and shame and guilt and all those kinds of things. And then they offer you a solution for it. And then that puts you in that same kind of nicotine cycle. You are shaming yourself. You're feeling bad. But hey, we got Jesus. Jesus forgives you. So then it corrects, it satisfies the deficit that it caused in the first place. Very similar to nicotine, right? And this type of manipulation is what causes people to then go from, I would say, that kind of behavior, like religious behavior, and it's real easily transmittable to addiction, to other coping mechanisms, because it functions almost the exact way. Because here's the thing. Humans are not idle creatures. We don't sit still. We're not going to just sit there. We're not sloths. We're not just going to sit there looking at the fucking wall. We got to be doing stuff. And this is why I think impoverished areas end up having a lot more addiction issues or I guess that's not true. Actually, rich spaces have just as many addiction issues. It's just not on the surface because they can afford to keep their addiction from really running into too many things, But when you're on the street, though, when you're poor and you don't have anything to do, right? You're gonna do something. We're not just gonna sit there, okay? So we're gonna do something, right? And addiction kind of gives you that drive to go do stuff, right? If you have no job to go to, you got nowhere to be, you got nothing, or even just a job that barely pays anything, and you're just barely making rent, you got like $50 left over. What are you going to do with that $50? Okay, well, now if you're trying to do drugs or whatever, if you've gotten yourself over that hurdle to do drugs, well, you're going to be like, okay, well, I need to, I can take this extra $50 and I'll just go look, I'll go down the street. Now it's created like you got to find contacts. You got to go be like, hey, can we meet up here? It's like the deal making part of it. It gives you all of these things to do, right? And then there's the payoff of the illusion of a high at the end. You're like, oh man, I feel better now. Now that I've chemically altered my mind to believe that I'm better now. Back to like what I was talking about with the manipulation, right, at church. Now think about this. A lot of us skeptics, right? We've had some kind of experience with church, right, of some kind. And we can see what's happening a lot of times. Now they do the service, right? It's they got the music at the beginning. Music is very emotional, right? The music is meant to kind of raise your emotional state to love and adoration and happiness and joy and all this type of stuff, right? So the music does that, right? Then the sermon is designed to, yeah, usually make you feel shameful. Usually be like, hey, you need us. You need church. Here's why. Because are you thinking about thoughts that you shouldn't be thinking about? Oh, well, then you should feel bad about that. But we got the cure for it. And then they focus on the people in the crowd that are not doing well. They always do this. I know you've heard it. Like, whatever you're going through, whatever maybe you're just having hard times. Maybe you're just maybe you can't get your bills paid. Maybe your relationships are falling apart. Well, I can tell you right now, we have an answer for it. We have an answer, and the answer is Jesus Christ. Now, if you could just take this one step and just stand up, just admit to yourself that you need this. Just admit it to yourself. You would need it. You need this, and you need our help because you can't do it on your own. You know it. People say that Jesus is my crutch. And I say, no, Jesus is my stretcher. He's my entire hospital. He's my wheelchair, being like, it's good that I'm more dependent. Like I'm so dependent and that's a good thing, basically selling this narrative that, hey, life is really hard. You can't handle it. You can't handle it. And this is the solution for your hard life, right? The exact same mentality that goes into addiction functions exactly like that. It's like, hey, life is hard. You can't handle hard, this hard life. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to do something to make it easier, right? Why don't you just chemically alter your state so that you won't care as much about how hard your life is, right? You won't notice it. You won't notice it as much. And that makes it better. Right? Look at alcohol. Alcohol is just deadening it's chemically removing fear. you know, you're chemically removing fear from your brain, right? Which isn't good. That's not good. You kind of need that fear, man. You at least need to be able to function with that fear. If you're chemically removing it all the time, you actually end up making yourself a more fearful person. I know it sounds crazy. Like, no, I can't. No, yes, because you've gotten used to chemically removing your fear. Now you are more fearful. I know a lot of people have experienced this when you drink a lot, right? Especially if you do it on a regular basis. You tend to wake up in the morning with like anxiety attacks. You feeling like, kind of like tremory. It doesn't help too that you're dehydrated as all get out and you feel awful. Your skin's all drying out. Your tongue feels like it's a freaking sandbox. It feels terrible, right? But the anxiety adds to that. Now, what ends up happening is because you wake up with that anxiety, even if you say right then, oh my goodness, I am never drinking again, you know, uh, which is seems like a very common trope for drinkers, right? I'm never doing that again. Whoa, that is some pain. Wow, I feel completely awful. I am never doing that again. And then by 5 o'clock that evening, they're like, well, I am feeling a little bit more anxiety today. Okay, I'm feeling a little bit more, and it's so you end up doing it to cope, and it's amazing how a coping mechanism for when you're feeling down can also be somehow the same coping mechanism for when you're not down, when you're feeling great. Like, well, of course I'm drinking. It's 4th of July. It's awesome. Look at all the fun. Look at all the fun. And then, well, of course I'm drinking. I just had a breakup. Of course. How could you have the same thing for both? That doesn't work. That doesn't make sense that you use the same thing for both. And it's almost as if you're just making up excuses. And it's easy to make up excuses with this one because it's so common. When, again, like I was saying with the groupthink kind of thing with the person drinking the O'Douls without realizing it, if you're just looking around and everybody's like, hey, this chemical creates fun, then you're gonna internalize that. You're gonna be like, oh yeah, okay, clearly this chemical, this drink, this poison, that's really what it is. It's literally rotten vegetable waste. And it has a smell and a taste that based because of evolution, we're like, don't do that. No, don't drink that. That's poison. you know, we have that. But when you're looking around at everybody and everybody's like, hey, this makes me have fun. This makes me have fun. This is a fun thing. It's like a shared delusion of all of the people, all acting like this stuff causes fun. Now, it kind of fits that way. Like I can be like, okay, sure. But really, if we actually look at it, does it actually cause fun? Or does it or is it something that just there because there's so many people that can't have fun without it are acting like it causes fun? What do you think about that, right? I mean, it's possible, right? How do we know, But that absolutely if you give it any kind of honest self-reflection and thought, it'll come to you pretty quickly that no, yeah, this is just a self-deception and everybody is deceiving themselves. And we are all part of the same mass delusion that drinking poison makes you have fun. And it doesn't. It's just not true. In fact, I would say, given my experience, and I drank for years and years, by the way, like I was definitely would have been considered an alcoholic or had an alcohol use disorder, is what we call it now, because um, the alcohol is, well, if you go through things like AA, they try to say that it's incurable. That's not true. That's not helpful. I don't know why they do this. And look, if AA works for you, that's fine. Like I'm not trying to take anything away from you, but there's a fatal flaw with AA, and we've been using the same program too since like I don't even know, like 100 years or something. It's ridiculous, Um, but there's a fatal flaw: the recidivism rate. They're like, how often does it work? Well, AA, because it's all anonymous, they don't have to report anything, right? So it's really difficult to get any kind of numbers out of it. And if you ask anybody that knows anything about AA, they'll say it works 100% of the time as long as they are following the program, which is circular. That's circular reasoning, right? Because basically they're saying as long as it's working, it works. That's what it works 100% of the time as long as it's working. Yeah, well, no fucking shit, Sherlock. What do you mean? Like, of course that's how it literally has to be like that, right? And so, but they also program you to believe that you can't cure it, and this is going to be something that you're going to have to seriously pay attention to your entire life, right? Well, in my experience with this, that's not actually true. It is curable, but you have to get your head right first, right? You have to snap your brain out of it and then let the behavior follow. Like I was saying before, you have to start actually evaluating what you believe about this substance in your life, right? If you truly do believe, just like the pseudoscience, the snake oil, You know, if you truly believe that it's helping, then it's really hard to get yourself to not believe that. You know what I mean? If or to then it's just real to you anyway. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's actually true because it's true to you. You believe it, right? The individual, the addict. And that's where we have to go. That this is how you fight addiction is through our beliefs. Skepticism is the most powerful tool against addiction because if we can actually ask the right questions and actually evaluate ourselves and be honest with ourselves, that is a huge one. That's another thing why I think skepticism is all about honesty. A lot of religious people that that act like we think it's all about smarts and everything and being intelligent. No, I don't think that's has anything. There's plenty of really intelligent conspiracy theorists, crazy people. You know, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with honesty. You're like, what? How do I actually know what I think I know? And actually, being okay with that vulnerability, right? And the thing is with alcohol addiction, with drug addiction, is we are lying to ourselves constantly. We're constantly making up excuses, and it's because it's basically I like to say it's a learned behavior with a chemical teacher, you know, because the chemicals really all they do, the alcohol, the unless you're as long as you're not somebody who wakes up with shakes, right? The withdrawal from alcohol is very similar to the withdrawal from cigarettes. It's hardly anything. It's basically zero, right? Which I know this freaks a lot of people. They're like, "What are you talking about?" I've like almost lost my mind a couple times. Yeah, but that's not because of the actual withdrawal. That's because of your response to the very slight um, feeling of insecurity that the nicotine addiction and alcohol addiction cause. It's a very slight feeling. But when you're like, oh, I know how to fix this. I know how to fix this. I know. You drive yourself into a frenzy, right? So the idea is, and this is CBT, is to get in the way, and that's cognitive behavioral therapy, is to kind of get in the way of that, right? And so instead of immediately, when you have this insecure feeling, instead of immediately going, oh man, I know exactly how to fix this. And if I would just do the thing that I know I can do to fix this, then I would be feeling so much better right now. Oh my God. And just driving yourself down in that insanity, right? That you just have to go, oh, thank goodness I don't have to worry about this anymore. Like flipping the script on that is really, really helpful. Every time you feel a craving, you're like, oh yeah, remember these cravings are nothing. They're nothing, I'll get over them real soon. And I'm just so glad that I don't have to deal with this anymore. I'm so glad that I'm not in this endless cycle of addiction, of feeling shitty and then not as shitty and then feeling shitty and not as shitty. Like, I'm so glad I'm not in that cycle. You got to that's how you get in the way of those cravings. I know I'm going all over the place here. I'm just sort of like stream of consciousness here with this, trying to get everything out that I can. Because really, the way addiction functions is it's like tightening your shoes for the relief of taking them off. It's like I said, with the person that gives you $5 and you think that they have done something for you, but they've stolen 100. So it's you're getting what you're getting is nothing. Like you're getting less than nothing. And once you realize that and see how this works, it's the best thing you can do to be able to snap yourself out of it. Is acknowledging, being honest with yourself, acknowledging what is happening, that hey, you're just making up excuses because you're afraid. That's really what it boils down to, is fear. You're afraid of what life would be like without it because you have all these false beliefs that, oh man, I can't have fun without alcohol. How am like with nicotine, this one kills me. With nicotine, be like, well, what am I going to do with my hands? What? What do you mean? Who thinks about that? Like, shit, I got to be doing something with my hands. And it's like if somebody said that they liked playing basketball, right? Because basketball is like a genuine high, right? And you're like, oh, you can't play basketball for a week, right? Like, say you hurt your ankle. Are they going to sit there and be like, but what am I supposed to do with my hands, though? Well, I'm not. I have to be playing basketball. I can't. I need. Hello. What am I? What am I just supposed to put these things down by my side? What's weird? Like, but that's the type of mind fucks that addiction does to you. right? It tells you that, hey, but what are you going to do with your hands though? And in your addicted mind, you're like, yeah, huh, that's a good, that's actually a solid point. I guess I just got to put them up in the air. you know, it's ridiculous. But these are the kinds of lies that the addiction tells us. A really good example, and if anybody's ever been addicted to just about anything, honestly, alcohol or cigarettes. So the two that I'm going to focus on because those are legal. And like I said, the opiates are kind of a special category, and addiction to stimulants is very similar to these two as well. But a great example is anybody that's ever, been a smoker or a drinker or whatever, and has had to go on a long like trip or something where they're not going to have access to it for a significant portion of time, right? So like even like an entire day or whatever, right? Say you're used to drinking or vaping or smoking, whatever, every day, right? And you're like, okay, I got to take this 6 hour trip. I'm going to be on an airplane. There's no smoking in the airplane. Um, I forgot to get nicotine patches or whatever, you forget the stuff like, and with alcohol too, you just like, I can't afford airplane alcohol or some shit. Right. So you have to go all this time without it. Right. And you notice when you don't have access to it, doesn't even bother you. But what ends up happening is at the end of the trip, you end up, you're like, okay, you start to expect in your head, oh, good. I can pretty soon here. I can light up a cigarette as soon as I get back. Right? I'm almost back. The announcer, the pilot's like, I'm like, hey, we're gonna be there in like 20 minutes. You're like, all right, 20 minutes. And I will, maybe like 27 minutes and I'll have my cigarette, man. This will be great. And you're sitting there getting ready for it and everything. Then something happens, like say the weather, and like the he comes over the last week. I'm sorry, 20 minutes is not, nope, it's gonna be 2 hours now. What? What do you mean 2 hours? How do we go from 20 to 2? No, 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 no. I need my cigarette, man. I need it. It wasn't until you noticed it. It wasn't until your expectations changed that you actually wanted to do it, right? That you actually started feeling withdrawal. How is that? How is it that you weren't feeling the withdrawal the entire time? It's almost like you decided to feel the withdrawal, right? Because you were expecting it. And that's what it is. It's your own brain, it's your own self and your expectations, and you getting upset about this very slight, almost non-existent feeling of insecurity in like the middle of your solar plexus. It's usually right there. It's just a little insecure feeling, right? But it's your response to that that causes you to then go into a frenzy. It's like when like there's a kid on the floor, right, and he's got the toy, and you take the toy away from the kid and the kid loses it. Oh my god, are they having toy withdrawal? Or do they need that toy? Was it, or do they want the toy? And because they don't have it, they're following themselves down into a tantrum because they know what they want and they know they can't have it. That's what causes the withdrawal symptoms, the perceived withdrawal symptoms of nicotine and alcohol. Like I said, other than like alcohol, like when you wake up and you got shakes and you start drinking almost immediately, that seek medical attention, and get help get help that way. But at this point, I want to go into, and I've kind of alluded to what the method is and how it works. Which is it's from this dude, Alan Carr. I really like because I used his book to quit nicotine and I used it to quit alcohol. So it's really really helpful and it's super easy. It's literally called The Easy Way to Control Alcohol and the Easy Way to Quit Smoking. Right, and all you have to do is listen to it. That's it. That's all you got to do. Don't stop. Don't stop smoking. Don't stop drinking. Don't drink while you're listening to it. And this is of course advice for people that have an addiction issue with alcohol or nicotine. Just listen to the book. Don't put any pressure on yourself. Don't be like, okay, I'm gonna stop as soon as I get done with this. Don't do that. Just you got to let yourself naturally uncoil all of the addictive behaviors and beliefs and everything. You got to uncoil all of those beliefs, and untangle it, and then you'll see it's just you can just stop without without even anything. Like, you don't feel anything. I felt no withdrawals. I felt nothing. You know, I just felt great. And so my recommendation is that if it's alcohol, you start with Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Control Alcohol. Listen to that. Um, and if you're doing it while you're working and stuff and you're distracted, maybe listen to it twice, right? Which is fine because you got to get it into your subconscious. Your subconscious is where you create your patterns, like your habits. Your habit forming part of your brain is in your subconscious. Right. And it's really hard to fight against your subconscious, as I think all addicts can tell. Like, they can consciously not want to be doing an addiction, but the impulses lead them there because your habit forming, the subconscious controls your impulses. So you have to deprogram your your addicted subconscious. You have to unwind all of the, and it's all based on beliefs, right? It's all based on what, the fears that are controlling you, because you can't even fathom life without this chemical, right? So it's all based in belief, which is why I said, like, skepticism is the most powerful tool here for addiction. And so you're just going to unwind all those beliefs. And so you do that by listening to this book. He provides very logic-based arguments. There's no religion alluded to in it at all. It's because, it even kind of needles at, like, evolution, the fact that we have evolved as creatures to be able to handle our reality without anything, without chemicals, right? Other than, like, of course, like food, water, shit like that. But we definitely don't need poison. That's not that's not one of the needs that we got, right? But yeah, so the main thing is just listen to it. Uh, and just in your day to day, don't put any pressure on it. Don't stop doing it. If you are drinking, just don't drink while you're listening to the book. Like, listen to the book and then drink that night, right? But don't change your habits at all, because we kind of need you to evaluate your like, why you are doing what you are doing when you are doing it. And so this is why I say don't stop the behavior and then wait for your brain to catch up. It won't catch up. This is why you see people in AA. They're like, I'm 20 years sober, and if I'm always on the edge of drinking. I don't know. Like those people, it's like, dude, you haven't done it for fucking 20 years. Why? Why are you still here? Why are you having to do this? Right? You are definitely not an alcoholic anymore. Quit calling yourself that. Right? But the thing is, all the beliefs are still there. They haven't deprogrammed their beliefs. They haven't snapped themselves out of all of the self-deception that they have put their brain through. They all this, it's a blender, it's a smoke and mirrors game of learned behavior from a chemical teacher, and you convince yourself of things, oh man, that I really need this, that, or the other. It was funny because one of the things that kind of got me down this path that made me want to start, like, actually looking at maybe stopping alcohol and stopping nicotine. And I went on that show, Truth Wanted, with Dan, with Objectively Dan. Great show. Awesome. It's an ACA show. He's a really cool dude. He tries to do street epistemology to callers. He kind of asks them questions, and they say their beliefs, and then he questions them on their beliefs. It's really good. It's a great show. A lot of fun. He always has a new guest too, which is, like, really helpful for those of us that are smaller YouTubers that would like some exposure. And so I went on that show. One of the things that they said, because it's an ACA show, so it's Atheist Community of Austin show, so it's pretty professional, right? So you had to be, like, hardlined. You had to make sure you had a certain internet speed that was all good. And I couldn't. They were like, you can't drink or vape when you're on the screen. They said, just write a little message, hey, I need to take a sip, or I need to do to take a hit of my vape or whatever, and they'll take you off the screen. And then I can, then you can do it, and then just let them, okay, I'm done now, I can come back, which to me, I'm like, I do it every 4 seconds. What do you mean? Like, I'm like Hunter S. Thompsoning this fucking vape, just like, it just lives right here. This is where it lives, just constant. If you go back to, like, a lot of my old content, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Not only that, but I was sitting there just downing beer after beer after beer on all of my streams. So you can really actually go back and look and see just how much of a problem it actually was for me, which was quite a problem. And after doing that show, I could see how debilitated I felt, from not having access to just being able to just at any moment lift up my, and it really made me wonder. It was like, okay, this is literally hurting what I want to be able to do, and so that was kind of like one of the first things that sort of that first cookie to crumble. And, from there it was, found the book, and I listened to the Alan Carr, the Easy Way to Control Alcohol one first. And I listened to it, I think like twice. And then I found another one too. That's a great follow up, right? That way you're not listening to the same book over and over. Because you really do got to get it into your subconscious. So you do need the repetition's really good if you're going to listen to it. Although I think that reading it, I'm pretty sure the repetition would help either way. But but the second one to follow it up is by this dude Craig Beck, and it's called the Fastest Way to Control Alcohol Guaranteed. If you listen to both these books in order, and then I would go back and listen to them again, right? It seems long, and it kind of is. It's a few out, and then I say like listen to for like maybe 3 hours a day, really get it in your brain. And then you should repeat it though, because if you're at work or something, you get distracted and stuff. So just listening to it again, you might catch whatever you missed. But the main thing is that it just walks you out, and it gives you logical, reasonable arguments for why you don't actually need this chemical. You don't actually want it. You believe you want it, but that's because you're addicted. It's not because you actually truly want it. And that's the thing. If you can get yourself to realize that you actually don't want it, you truly don't want it, not just not wanting it in the bad times, but like, oh man, but once my life gets better, then I can go back to doing that again. Not like that. Like actually not wanting to do it. You tend to not do things you don't want to do and you don't truly want to do, right? And what ends up happening is the alcohol just ends up tasting really bad. It's not fun. It's actually less fun, because you tend, you get sick if you're not doing it all the time. If your stomach's not ready for it, you feel dehydrated, and you start to associate all of these feelings with alcohol. And so you just truly, from the bottom of your heart, do not want to drink. And it makes it so easy. You just stop. You just stop. And you're not trying to you're not trying to stop and then you're like, I can take it. I can take it. Don't do that. Don't do that. It doesn't help. It just actually makes the whatever it is that much more, it makes you want it that much more, because you're building it up in your head as this awesome, great thing that you totes want, but you actually don't. You don't want it. You just believe that you do because there's a chemical imbalance in your brain. And it's really difficult to fight chemical imbalances in your brain. Like, have you ever gone to a diner at night and you're like, please give me decaf, and they don't, and then you're just sitting there like, I knew it. I knew that wasn't decaf. I knew it. I felt way too good as we were leaving that restaurant. I was there was pep in my step. There was pep. Okay. You know, that's because you can't fight brain chemicals, man. Like, I know people don't like to admit it. We are big bags of chemicals. We're very elaborate bags of chemicals. So and it's amazing how it actually does control our behavior in a lot of different ways, and then a lot of what we do is we rationalize things after the fact. Have you ever uh, said something stupid, you know, just gonna stop. I'm just gonna stop there. Because I have. No. And then after the fact, you're like, oh man, uh, that actually wasn't stupid, because if you think about it, and you make up some nonsensical some justification that you were absolutely not thinking about when you said the stupid thing. But now after the fact, you're like walking it back and going, no, if it was like this, then it wouldn't be stupid. So I'm just going to think that that's how it was. That's what we do a lot, you know? And this is where it gets into, like, if you really wanna follow this back, it gets into determinism and things like that, where we don't actually make any choices. Of course, I don't believe that, necessarily. I'm more of a compatibilist, where we don't make choices the way that we think we do, but, I do think that we make choices. I don't know if I'd say that we could go all the way back to the Big Bang and it would unwind exactly the same way. I think there's just too many variables. But, like Ian Malcolm was saying, the great Dr. Malcolm, it's too many variables, you know? He does like a little drip of water thing, and anyway. So, that is the advice I wanna give, though, just out the gate. First of all, seek medical attention, you know? Don't go to the religious-based ones. They literally hurt. They literally work the opposite of what they're supposed to do, right? They're trying to get you out of one addiction and then be addicted to Jesus, right? And that's functionally the same as an addiction because of how it affects your mind, and it uses like dopamine hits and stuff like that. Anyway, so don't go with any of the religious ones. Don't point anybody in the way of uh, religious solutions for addiction. Medical, it's a medical issue. Okay, it's a medical issue with a medical solution, right? So that is like if it's always talk to the doctor. But this is, I think, what the best way to get your head out of it, to unwind what you have learned, or believe that you have learned, as far as your relationship with this chemical. And you need to unlearn that stuff. And the best way to unlearn that stuff is to listen to all the reasons why you don't actually want to do whatever it is. The Alan Carr, like I said, Alan Carr, the fastest or the easy way to quit alcohol. Alan Carr, the easy way to quit smoking. And then Craig Beck, the easy way or the fastest way to control alcohol, guaranteed. And he's got like a whole community too that you can be part of. Craig Beck does, where it's all of ex addicts. So that is the one thing I would say that is actually good about AA is the community. Community is always a good thing, right? But just don't put too much stock in it, right? And that's what I'd say. Like if you want to go be around other people and help encouraging each other, and stuff like that, that's a good thing, right? But just don't see it as like the end all be all, right? Because it's based on a very flawed premise. But hey, thank you all so much for hanging out and watching my little presentation here of how to beat addiction the skeptic's way, the skeptic's guide to beat addiction. That's what I probably should have called this. That's what you know what? Damn it. Although I don't want to piss off Steven Novella. That dude's awesome. Okay. He's great. All the novellas are awesome. Anyway, if you don't know who they are, I don't know what you're doing. Go out there and listen to all the lecture courses and listen to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe book and listen to the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast. All good stuff. All the best. So, but hey, thank you all so much for hanging out. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully this is helpful. I think it was very helpful for me. And like I said, I've dealt with addiction for, I don't even know how long, like 20, 25 years, something like that. Long time I've dealt with addiction and stuff. So this was definitely the easiest and most practical way to beat addiction. So if you have any loved ones or you yourself are feeling like you're drinking more than you like to, just listen to these books, and keep an open mind and exercise your skepticism, because that is the most powerful tool against addiction. Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
Yes, loud and
Good,
clear.
good. Hi, how are
I'm
you?
good. How are you?
I am doing well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for donating your time and talking to me. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I'm honored
No
to speak
problem.
with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Just to kind of start off, if you wanted to just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do, which is a million things. I wrote them all down.
Yeah. So I am Mandisa Thomas, and I am the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers Incorporated. We are headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I'm a New York City native originally,
Oh,
but I've
wow.
been in the Atlanta area for more than half my life. And the work I do is my organization provides support and community for Black folks and allies who are either fully atheists, agnostic, humanists, etc. And also, we are a resource for people who are questioning their religious beliefs in favor of leaving. We also advocate for more representation and amplifying the voices of the Black non-religious demographic, especially in the face of a highly religious Black community.
Yes.
And so we also engage in just a number of activities that range from social to service and definitely advocacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And do you remember kind of the defining moment where you realized an organization like that needed to exist or there was a need for it?
Yes, so it came at the end of 2010 when I re-identified as an atheist. My background was pretty secular.
Mhm.
But over the years, I resolved myself to being spiritual but not religious. And as I tried to connect with more people, Black folks in particular, I found that there was a larger secular community in the Atlanta area.
Wow.
However, when I spoke with a few Black atheists online, they expressed their reservations and their experience. They told of their experiences when they attended meetups in person or secular, non-religious or atheist meetings. And being either the only or one of the very few people of color there, as well as some of the microaggressions and that they experience from other attendees. And so I attended such a meetup and pretty much experienced some of these same things. Some of the
Interesting.
people said, I've never met a Black atheist before.
Yeah.
And so, and also, just this weird idea that I wanted to be connected to the only other Black person that was there, even though we were engaging in some really good conversation. I mean, it turns out that we ended up having conversations about what it is like to be Black and atheist, and also the other person was gay. And so
Oh,
there
wow.
was a defense about that. People
Yeah.
didn't recognize that there was, oh, they said we all go through the same things, we all have it hard. And so being in Atlanta, which is a predominantly Black city, a very well populated Black city, which is still very, very religious in nature. You have some of your famous mega churches here with some of your famous mega pastors. At the end of that meetup, I spoke with the other Black person there, and I just said, there has to be more of us out here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps they've had these same experiences in these spaces where they were either tokenized or ignored, and they didn't feel comfortable enough to come back because there were people who didn't directly relate to their experiences. And also the local, the area, yeah, they're very welcoming people. I ended up having a great time there, but when it comes to certain questions that are asked, especially as it pertains to Black communities, as well as the lack of representation,
Mm-hmm.
it became necessary to establish an organization or a local network to try to bring more of us out.
Right.
And
Right.
also the ability to speak to issues that directly pertain to us, that involve areas and matters of, racial justice, things that people might have missed about their churches, but that we could not recreate, but certainly provide an alternative for, and help reach more, and help engage in more Black spaces as well. So because that didn't seem to be a priority for the other groups and organizations. So, we took on a multi-prong, like
Yeah.
a multifaceted
Yeah.
mission here.
Huge undertaking.
Yes, yes. And that was really where we got started. And when we had our first meeting and there were about 14 to 15 people in attendance, we knew that we were on the right track.
Yeah.
And that there were people who were looking for this.
Yes.
For folks who directly identified with the struggles. And we also wanted to work with the other local groups as well. So it wasn't that we were trying to separate ourselves in any way,
right,
but to help build up that demographic in order for us to start collaborating and working together, as well as putting on our own independent events and start advocating independently as a result, and as a demographic. So
yeah,
that is where it really became a need, especially for Black non-religious voices to speak to issues that directly impact Black communities as well as help to, I guess, address the issues of diversity and equity and inclusion in secular spaces.
Absolutely. It sounds like it sounds very necessary, obviously very important, but it also sounds like that gap was just there for so long, that gap of inclusivity. Do you find that people of color coming out as atheist or non-religious or secular, do you find that they face different fears, worries, obstacles, judgment than Caucasian people or people of any other race coming out as atheist?
Yes, we do. And let me say that for many of us, a lot of our struggles are very similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
As when we deconvert, or we are trying to unlearn that indoctrination, deconstructing, our religious beliefs. There are definitely challenges that are very, very similar, if not in many instances the same. The extra added layer for people of color, and this is documented in a Black non-religious Americans report that we just released with American Atheists, is that Black non-religious people in America tend to have higher rates of concealment because of the very high religiosity in Black communities.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the problem is that religion is often associated with the Black identity so much that if you separate that, it's like you're rejecting your Black identity. It's like you're rejecting the history of, Black people in this country, which the history shows that there have always been humanists, atheists, and freethinkers in Black communities, even if we aren't in larger numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But there is so much of a tie into the church as an institution in Black communities, where they are seen to be representative of all of us. And religion is so tied into the politics and the culture of Black communities that it's almost impossible to separate. They're almost seen as inseparable. And we see this in Senator Raphael Warnock, who is the Reverend Raphael Warnock as well. Yes. And so, of course, that was, and we give credit for him being a progressive senator. He certainly is not a fundamental reverend. However, the fact that he was able to run on that platform, or that he that says a lot for what appeals to Black communities. And we look at the history of the church as well. However, that being said, when it comes to letting go of the God concept and what it means to be Black in this country and the Black identity, as well as Black culture, it's so tied in that, again, it seems as being inseparable. And with the historical influence of religion in Black communities, it's much, much harder to deconstruct and to even come out of religion, because of the nature of how the church really became a powerful institution, a polarizing institution. So we are dealing with a number of factors here.
Yes, it sounds like it. Yeah.
Some that deal with, and we cannot talk about the church and not discuss racial justice, economic justice, and how it has played a part. And so those are often difficult conversations to have, and we're seeing some progress, but yeah, we have, when we see the overrepresentation of religion in Black communities in particular, we know that there is definitely we have a harder road to climb, especially with the still lower representation of openly identified atheists.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And especially in the South, that it adds an extra layer to the religion and the race, because in the North, you don't necessarily, I spent like 13 years in Chicago, but I was raised in Arkansas. I never really heard much about church when I was living in the North. They were there. I even went to a couple of them. And in the South, everything is God-based. Everything is faith-based. And I can only imagine how that amplifies when you start to talk about Black churches and Black people.
Yes, you cannot escape the influence of the church in any city you go to. Mm-hmm. And the same is that is definitely true for areas like Chicago.
Yeah.
Certainly New York, where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly more people tend to be more liberal and progressive, but they still regularly attend church. There is a church on almost every corner in Black communities, and often they are in areas that tend to be economically impacted negatively and have less access to other resources. So yes, you can never ever escape the church, as it's more pronounced in the South. But even in northern cities, your cities on the West Coast, any of your liberal cities, you are going to find an overabundance of religious institutions in Black communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you think about some of the top, Ivy League universities in this country that are located in the North, and they always have a Catholicism or Baptist or some kind of Christian undertone or degree segue that you can take. And so, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. One of the things I was curious about was, since joining the atheism space, I've noticed that a lot of the tone is, welcoming, inviting, bringing people into the fold. I don't want to say proselytizing, almost like but still our own version of proselytizing. But I was curious, if you had to name a few, what are ways in that space where racism exists that isn't the standard? I feel like we all know the standard racism, like words you don't say to people, things like that. But what are the subtle, nuanced ways that racism appears in the atheism space?
Yeah, so I just did a talk on at the American Atheist Convention about how to address white supremacy in the movement, right? So in many ways, I remember some years ago, I was doing a talk in Toledo, Ohio, and the talk was on how the secular community could learn from the hospitality industry. And during the Q&A, there was a white woman who asked, what was our organization going to do about Black on Black crime? Because in cities like Chicago, where crime is rampant, she was wondering if our organization was going to do something about that. So first, the question was unrelated to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
And also, how presumptuous was it that as an organization, we were supposed to do something that is in the hands of law enforcement,
right,
as well as requires, a like civics lessons on, how our communities are impacted historically. And this, it was just, it really was racist in nature.
Yeah.
So we've had people ask us ridiculous questions of that nature. And these are people who often mean well, and also they also expect that as people of color, that we have all of the answers and that we speak for all Black people. And that, one of our organizers in the Louisville area said that she was asked at a predominantly white meetup, why do Black people say the N-word? And it's like, well, why would you charge her with that question? So there are definitely notions about Black folks who that many some inexperienced and just some privileged and just some who are just being jerks, ask of people of color that are very, very, that are just outright very racist.
Mm-hmm.
And these are things that they don't even realize that they're doing. They're well-meaning people, but their mannerisms are just, especially if they've never seen a person of color at their events before. Sometimes, in their attempt to be more welcoming, I remember at a conference or at a convention in 2019, I was approached by a random white woman who asked who I was. She thought I was an attendee, and my badge clearly said I was a speaker. So there tends to be an undermining at times of, if we aren't immediately recognized, that somehow we may just be a random attendee. And it's like, well, I'm a speaker here, I'm in your program. Certainly I should be treated with just as much respect as the other person. So, or as the other speakers. So it was, and then there was a comment made of, oh, well, I guess I guess I'm an ally because I'm a member of the local NAACP. And it was like, wow. Yeah, it's very much statements like that from, people who will say things, they'll say things like Black Lives Matter. They'll say the things that sound good, but when it comes to engaging people of color, they'll ask the most rude and disrespectful questions, and out in the public too.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some, very, very, those are some, even if it wasn't implicitly racist, there are quite a few things that we have experienced.
Yeah.
I've experienced over the years.
Yeah, that's
in this movement. And
wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. Basically saying like, I'm friends with Black people, so I just want to ask you these rude questions. Like, I donate money, so I have the right to ask you these questions. And that the wildest part is, in all of the interviews I've done with any atheists, agnostics, seculars, people who have studied, people, never once have I thought to ask them about crime. So why would they ask you about crime?
Mm-hmm.
I would never ask somebody, what are you going to do about the crime in your city, though? What's going on there? Even though it has nothing to do with what we've been talking about. That's why this undue burden, basically, for people of color to answer for all people of color, when that doesn't even make sense. Why? Like, that's not even what you're there to talk about. Wild. Right. Now, have you found that, there's the atheism and secularism space, then there's the racial kind of separation there with Caucasian and people of color. And then would you say that there's also an entirely separate segregation there for being a woman too, like within the non-believers of color?
Well, so there are a number of organizations in the community, and they have very specific focuses. Mm-hmm. So it's not that that we are segregating, but we are able to effectively concentrate on different various demographics. Okay. So there are some atheist women's groups because, and to discuss how they have to deal with some of the atheist men who have been just as bad as some of the believers in the movement or believers. And so there are certain spaces for Black atheist women as well, or other women of color. We as an organization co-produce the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference now, that features all speakers of women of color speakers who don't necessarily have the opportunity to be on a broader stage than other, and we also like to activate up and coming activists and organizers and content creators. So that is our space to do that, when the majority of the community, which again tends to be very welcome, does try to be welcoming. However, for various reasons, the diversity may not necessarily be represented well. Right. And it depends on where they are. And part of that, which is something that we've talked about over the years, about how they can increase or how they can better improve on those efforts, that has kind of fallen to the wayside a bit. Yeah. So yes, so there are probably a lot of breakdowns of certain groups, because there are, in an attempt for us to all try to come together, sometimes there are some people who there are some white people who come into Black spaces, or predominantly Black spaces, and think that they can do the same things in different groups, or that they've done in different groups. And our spaces are, so we are very guarded because of, the way so many people have to be mindful of how, they engage in some of the subject matter. Sometimes we have to be very careful with that. And we certainly want to help as many people as possible, but we also want to make sure that, people who are in the space are truly wanting to learn and support, rather than just be a part of a space and be a jerk in some way, because there are people who are suffering from trauma as a result of leaving their religious belief, and they are still dealing with many challenges. And then the conversations at times is different. It's very different. The perspectives, like on race, the perspectives on women that come from the people who live them and experience them directly, are going to be different than those who may just be observing.
Right.
So, these spaces at times are needed so that, we can come together as well on a larger scale.
Right. I do also think it's interesting that there's this underlying implication, and it might not even be as underlying, it might just be kind of open implication, that if there is a disconnect between Caucasian non-believers and people of color who are non-believers, it is now your burden to smooth that over and to make them feel comfortable. I noticed that while you were telling me that.
Goodness.
Yeah,
yes.
It becomes on you, even though we play the card of, oh, I didn't know, I was just ignorant. It then becomes your job to smooth that over and be the safe ones and communicate in a safe way, in an inclusive way, which is not fair.
We're the ones who have to abide by the respectability politics. If we get too angry, then we're going to offend people. And disrupt the status quo, especially when there are important topics that that impact us, that come up. We get some pushback about, what does this have to do with atheism and humanism, when it's like, well, all of these matters intersect.
Right.
So there is definitely some discomfort there on their part that we are expected to fix, even though we are in a minority.
Right.
And we are the ones who have dealt with, a severe imbalance in being able to find and develop those resources.
Right. They come into your space and you're expected to be the hostess, as though you invited them. For you personally, how did you find yourself so heavily involved in secularism and humanism? How did that come about in your life and become such a priority to you?
It was actually unintentional. When we started we started Black Nonbelievers as Black Nonbelievers of Atlanta. It was only intended to be local, because there were other organizations and entities that existed. And we were, I guess it's my nature as a person. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, and I'm very assertive and in how I handle myself. And so it just worked out that in my engagement in the community, there's always opportunities to volunteer and to get involved, which is needed. And I didn't realize how much it was needed until we got started. So and in connecting with the larger community, I remember attending my first American Atheist Convention in 2011 when we got started, because we wanted to let people know that we were here. We wanted to connect with other atheists. We wanted to get to know the organizations who we would potentially be working with. And so in doing that, and really expanding our networking and engaging in the community, and I've met so many wonderful people as a result. It just so happened that there were a few initiatives that started coming around. We had people contacting us for interviews where we were filmed, other media opportunities. And it just really became this thing where I wasn't expecting it to become my life, but it did.
Yeah.
And I realized that my outspoken nature, my unapologetic nature, just made this a natural fit for me. And because there are so many others who either cannot be out with their identities, or they don't think that they are, assertive enough to be in leadership. So it just kind of happened. It was a steady progression, continuing to connect with people, and then eventually serving on boards of other organizations. And so it just really became, and then lending my skill as an organizer, as a manager, which really helped with the development of Black nonbelievers, and just getting out and connecting with other entities. It just really, really helped us. It really, really helped us a lot. So
Yeah.
like I said, it kind of fell in. It just kind of
Yeah.
fell into it. It wasn't something that I didn't say I wouldn't take it seriously at first, because I did. I really wanted to get out and meet new people. But as far as the transition into leadership, there were just a few things that were happening at that time, and opportunities that came up that just kind of catapulted that. And I can say I don't regret it, because it really has made a difference in a lot of people's lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It seems like, from what I read up on you, it seems like it's just kind of blown up into like this tree with all these different branches going all these different directions. But at the end of the day, it all leads back to your initial start of your organization and how it just kind of exploded, which is just proof out there that people wanted this and people needed this. They just didn't have it. And there was that need for it, and that gap, I guess, in the inclusivity. That's very interesting. And before that, what were you involved in politics or law at all? Or did you do something entirely different before you got so heavily involved?
Not at all. I was the event services manager at the Centers for Disease Control's Conference Center at their headquarters campus down here in Atlanta, right next to Emory University. Before that, no, I wasn't really involved in politics like that. I mean, of course, my family and I are active, voters, but like, as far as in the forefront of an organization, no. I mean, I was just, I was just an everyday working person, with a family, but who realized that this was an area of my life that became important to me.
Absolutely.
And over the years, as I really examined my my perspective, and also thinking about, how harmful religion has been to a number of people, it just really became important to me that I become involved in this community. And when I met others, because I remember hearing, I remember getting pushback for starting to eventually openly express my dissent with religion and the concept of God. I just really, it just became that important to me. And it helped me, let me realize that, when you have that skill to organize, as well as to, to potentially work with a team of people, even if it's because Black nonbelievers is a result of building from the ground up. Especially here in Atlanta, there was no organization like it in the Atlanta area, but even nationwide, there were other groups that were based around discussions, speakers and what have you. But as far as building a very supportive community around, especially around things that Black people do, and that everyday people do, that was certainly lacking. And so there was a void that we knew we were filling. We just didn't know how much.
Right. Or like how much people would embrace it and demand more. The great thing about starting something that's popular is you've started something that's popular. The only downside is now you have to keep producing and being present. Yeah. So you were not raised religious, if I read
not
correctly.
Entirely correct.
But your extended family was religious?
That is correct. My father's mother, my paternal grandmother, very, very religious, and belonged to an apostolic church. It's similar to a Pentecostal, very evangelical, a lot of holy rollers.
Yeah.
And that side of the family is, they're all born and raised in New York. So there isn't like a super duper fundamentalism, but there is still a deep seated belief in God and religion and activity in the church. Now, my mother's side of the family, not as much. I have some Christian family members, I have Muslim family members, and there are also some atheist family members, atheists and agnostics. So for me, it was, I remember one of my earliest secular influences was my maternal grandmother, who was very festive, big on celebrating holidays,
Mhm.
but there was never any prayer. You didn't have to, go to church on Easter Sunday. It was all about the candy, the Easter bunny, and the Easter eggs. So I realized early on that you could be festive, you
Oh yeah.
could do good things without believing in a God or subscribing to any religious traditions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, was there ever a time in your life where you felt the need to come out and reject religion, or was it pretty much understood just because you weren't raised religious and you never really partook in religion that you just kind of continued on in that way?
No, I had to come out. I
Yeah.
had to. I had one of my mentors, who was one of my former teachers, very, very big on like social justice, racial justice. But when it came to her belief, she holds that very close. And so for her to see me actually openly express my sentiments about Christianity and rejecting the concept of God, it scared her so much that she felt like she had to save me.
Oh,
And so I thought, well, yeah, there's no need to save me at all. And
right.
so I had some acquaintances who everything was couched in religious language and the expectation that we all were. And I remember even at my job, and my former job, because I resigned from there in 2018. Now we're at a federal facility and people are praying before certain events. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. What are we doing here? And there was just such
First
religious
Amendment,
language. And
anybody?
so,
Yeah.
right. And it's like, so I had to make my identity known, not simply because I wanted people to just stop everything,
Yeah.
but the Christians did not have the right to put their stuff up. And we had Hindus working with us. We had Muslims working with us, and there were atheists among us too. So it's like, that's something that needed to stop. So
Right.
it was important that people understood that everyone did not subscribe to religion or the concept of God in the same way, and especially at professional places like
Right.
work.
Right.
It did not belong there. And
Right.
so I think it helped to make people more mindful of how to engage and just basically keep your religion to yourself, especially
Yeah.
at work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's again another instance in which the person or the group overpowering everyone else is not the ones having to then deal with the cleanup. It's the people that are being overpowered or being outnumbered that have to bear the burden of, hey, we're here. Why are you doing these things that don't include any of us or we don't subscribe to? Why are you making the rules and the way we behave here at work, a professional setting, so so what's the word I'm looking for, like pointed, I guess, towards their beliefs? And when you're a believer, you think, and I remember this from back when I was a religious person, you think that what you are doing is showing people light and happiness and grace, but not everybody wants that light and that happiness and grace. Like
Right.
I the way that I explain it to people is I'm like, I totally understand that you think putting up your religious paraphernalia everywhere is just pleasant and it's loving and the whole message is to love everyone. But how would you react if you moved somewhere where the entire building was covered in something pertaining to Muslim belief or Judaism? Suddenly you would feel alienated and you would feel targeted and you would feel and people seem to kind of grasp that, and they're like, well, I'm not racist, I don't have a problem with Muslim people. And I'm like, exactly, but you still kind of pause when you consider living in a place or working in a place where you are expected to do the same prayer or be at the same, religious conventions and events that they have. You still would have an issue with it, even if you don't consider yourself a racist person.
Absolutely.
So it goes back to that whole undue burden thing, which is very interesting. And I've also found that I feel like, especially in a country like the United States, which ironically one of our number one amendments is the separation of church and state. Our church is supposed to be able to run everything and make decisions for everyone and know what's best for everyone without having to ask, when we are also a melting pot that includes, right? So it's like, you have to pick one. You have to pick one. You're either going to say there's a separation of church and state, or you're going to admit that there's not one. And you're either going to say that we're a melting pot, or you're going to admit that you wish we weren't, and you wish everyone would subscribe to the same lifestyle and belief. And so it's just interesting that there's this pattern in all of your examples where, even though you were the unincluded group or the underrepresented group, you still had to bear the burden of including yourself and reminding people to include you.
And constantly fighting for ourselves as well, which becomes so daunting, and it is exhausting. And it's that, we have to constantly stand up and defend ourselves in a country that is supposed to be secular, right? The number, there's the number of religious nuns are rising, but there is still this religious faction,
right,
that we still have to battle against.
Right.
And so it's
right.
like, man.
Then there's the issue of, if you fight too hard, there are stereotypes held against you then. Like, I have never once in my life heard the term angry white woman.
Right.
I've never heard it. I've never heard that. But I feel like if you were to put your foot down one too many times, you would have that stereotype of the angry Black woman, which is unfair, it's racist, and it undermines what you're trying to accomplish by representing yourself.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of white women who are upset with the term Karen, right? The one who, or Becky, the ones who complain about those who they deem the angry Black woman, or, the folks who they may complain about and call on unnecessarily or even unceremoniously.
Right.
And when we've had to deal with these, with these stigmas and these respectability politics, and when we fight against that, all of a sudden now we're the bad guys. And so, it's like, maybe at some point, if you don't like that label, think about what that feels. Think about that feels for us. So,
I'm sorry you don't like when we call you out on your behavior. I don't know what else you want me to do. Right. Do you find that your determination towards atheism and humanism and representation, do you find that changed at all when you became a mother, or is it about the same, or were there aspects that changed in terms of being a mom?
Well, I had my children before I got into the movement, and there were already other factors in my life that led me to have a more progressive outlook and progressive manner of raising my children. I think for me, it made me more determined, because I don't want to see them go through this.
Right.
And hopefully, whatever I do as a leader or as an activist will help them to, because I learned very early on about what, how, like I said, how Black communities were impacted. And so I had a social awareness, that to me as a child, I would only hope that what I stand for, as an individual, but also as an organization leader, that it shows it sets an example for my children, to stand up for whatever they feel is right, and whatever they think is going to help the world in general, or, just people who are at a disadvantage. So it really made me more determined to just continuously at least be that guide for them. And if that, like I said, if that helps them along the way, then great. It only really just fueled it more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I read somewhere that you won the 2020 Harvard Humanist of the Year, I believe, award.
Yeah, I was a co-recipient of the 2020 Harvard Humanist of the Year award. I was also the recipient of the 2022 Irving and Annabelle Wolfson Award, which is presented by the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester, Massachusetts.
Wow. And for somebody who may not be familiar with humanism, how would you describe being a humanist, and how does that differ and also relate to atheism and secularism?
Right. So humanism is a life philosophy that basically imparts doing good for the world and doing good for, not just mankind, but just for the planet, without the notion that you absolutely have to believe in a God. Atheism is just the identity portion, or the lack of, or the rejection of those beliefs in God. Humanism sort of moves it forward. It's like, now not every atheist is a humanist,
Right.
but most humanists tend to be atheists, and that is because when you leave those religious beliefs behind, you still can show how good of a person you are without, religious dogma, without, and based on an evidence-based principles, principles that, or and life lessons that have been proven to work. So we always want to follow, the evidence. We want to follow, the verification, and you don't need a God to do that. And
Right.
so yeah, it's the next step in the evolution, if you will,
Yeah.
or it should be.
Yeah.
Because there are some humanists who could care less about racial justice. In fact, they some of them have fought against, they've been
That's so odd.
quite stubborn. Yeah, it's
That how can you call yourself a humanist and also fight against
right.
all humans enjoying the same privileges and lifestyles and opportunities? I'm almost curious to ask one of them how that works, because
Yeah.
that flies right over my head. Has there ever been a time in your life where you thought for a moment or longer, like, oh shit, maybe there is a God. Maybe I have been wrong this whole time. Ever been worried about it?
I mean, I think for all of us, when we have crisis points in our lives,
Yeah.
we certainly are just like, man, I mean, I honestly sometimes wish there was, because I'm like, if it's going to be that simple, then great, I mean, that would be perfect. If there
Right.
was a being we could call on, and all of a sudden, like like the wave of a magic wand, then we can, just everything could just, go away. But that's not how the world works.
Right.
And also, for people who say, well, God doesn't work like that, well, there are plenty of atrocities that have taken place in the course of of being on this planet. And there are certain things that, if there was a God, could and should have been prevented.
Yes.
But you know if you subscribe to that, then, and especially if what happened was no fault of the individual, then how can you justify belief in a God, in a benevolent God, and then say, well, he works in mysterious ways? That's actually that's very cruel and abusive.
Yeah.
So yeah, sure, there are times where, yeah, absolutely, I think we kind of all at one point have, but it's like, yeah, no, that's just kind of not how the world works. And
Right.
just because we're non-believers, it doesn't mean that we don't experience hard times.
Right.
It also doesn't mean that we don't have other coping mechanisms or ways to try to solve our problems.
Mm-hmm.
And many believers don't realize that we usually try to do it the same way, or we impart a lot of similar methods, but it's just that you go one step further and attribute it to a God, and we don't. So
Right.
that part is always very interesting. But yeah, I mean, sure, sometimes I think many of us have been there. I can't claim to speak for everyone, but yeah, I think, and there's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean, oh, see, you turn back to God. No.
No.
There's times of uncertainty. I'm okay with saying I don't know.
Right.
Certain
Exactly.
things, so.
Yeah, I'm much more likely to trust somebody who says they don't know than to trust somebody who has all the answers. But I try to tell people, I try to describe it as, when there is turbulence on a plane, I still pray. But that's, I'm still gripping that seat, like praying, like begging, hoping I was a good
It's like,
person.
hopefully, the pilots can navigate through
Yep.
all of their education and skill.
Yep. But I do think it's interesting how much is attributed to God, that in my opinion, is not necessary. For example, I had a friend who bought a house recently, and they were like, yes, God gave us this home. And I remember saying to them, I said, you got on Zillow, you looked it up, you typed in the radius and the budget that you had and the area that you wanted to live in, you got in your car, you drove, you toured the house, you negotiated the price. How can you not
did all the work,
right? Like, I was like, I'm
how
confused.
can you attribute that to a God?
Right. And then, that's when the whole argument goes, well, God gave me the, money and so you could just, it's a whole cyclical thing. If there were any misconceptions about Black non-believers that you wanted to just kind of throw out there, and people might be surprised to find out, what would you say in terms of stereotypes, common misconceptions, things like that?
I mean, many of us are just like, our organization does not promote like separation on its face. Right. We exist to help amplify the voices of the still unheard and those that are still not represented as well as we should be. And I think for many of us, we're just trying to live like everyone else. And that we are a part of we are just as much of a welcoming community. And, so whatever it is that, we impart some of the same principles as, as other organizations. Many of our missions do align, but we do want to make sure that we are representing still a very underrepresented demographic. And so that's basically what we're about.
Yeah. And if you had to give any advice to somebody, let's say like a person of color who might be considering leaving their religion or might be considering they don't necessarily subscribe to the way they were raised, what would you say to them in terms of coming out or trying to make that decision for themselves?
I would say first, it is okay to make that decision. It is, and come to it at your own pace. You don't have to rush it. If you want to make sure, please, make sure that your decisions are informed. And try not to do it at the behest of anyone else, whether it's pressure from your family or even pressure from others in our own community. And that once you make that decision, please know that it is liberating. It is very freeing, and there's support for you. You don't have to go through this alone. You're not the only one going through it. And that's the main thing we always get across is that, you aren't alone. There are definitely more of us out here, even if it doesn't seem like it. So we don't all agree on everything, but it is a worthwhile process. And it's good to connect with others so that that there are others out here who will support you.
Yeah, absolutely. And where can we, for you in particular, where can we find more of your content? Where can we do you have a calendar somewhere where your events are posted? Where can we find more of just your work and your activism?
So definitely, first and foremost, visit our website at blacknonbelievers.org. You can find our affiliates on the website. And you can tap into those events, especially if you are local to those areas. And even if you aren't, we do virtual events as well. We post our national events too. So you can join any of our meetup groups to find out more. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And also we do have a YouTube channel where we debuted our show In the Cut in January of this year. That's so cool. we do interviews and post about, and we share information about upcoming events. So that's definitely, we encourage people to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out, check out what we have coming up through our website. And that's where you can connect with us. You can subscribe to our email list. And of course, everywhere we are on social media to stay updated.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, that was all the questions I had planned for you today, but I really appreciate you spending your Mother's Day nonetheless with us.
No problem.
Donating your time and your opinions and your thoughts. And I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. And I hope that the rest of your Mother's Day is fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.